of Torah. We're in Parshat Ekev in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, beginning with verse 12. We'll read through our English translation, then I'll share with you a bit of a focus study, and then we'll have our collective conversation. Let me share with you the opening verses. And if you obey these rules, if you do these rules and observe them carefully, Adonai, your God, will maintain faithfully for you the covenant that God made on oath with your ancestors. God will favor you and bless you and multiply you. God will bless the issue of your womb and the produce of your soil, your new grain and wine and oil, the calving of your herd and the lambing of your flock, in the land that God swore to your ancestors to assign to you. You shall be blessed above all the other peoples. There shall be no sterile male or female among you or among your livestock. Adonai will ward off from you all sickness. God will not bring upon you any of the dreadful diseases of Egypt, about which you know, but will inflict them upon all your enemies. We're now on verse 16. Hannah, would you like to read a little bit?
Thank you. You shall destroy all the peoples that your God, Adonai, Yod He Vav He, delivers to you, showing them no pity. And you shall not worship their gods, for that would be a snare to you. Should you say to yourselves, these nations are more numerous than we, how can we dispossess them? You need have no fear of them, but you have but to bear in mind what God did to Pharaoh and all the Egyptians, the wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and the portents, the mighty hand and the outstretched arm by which your God liberated you. Thus will God do to all the peoples you now fear. Your God will also send a plague against them until those who are left in hiding perish before you. Do not stand in dread of them, for your God is in your midst, a great and awesome God.
Thank you so much. Sherry, would you like to read a little bit there at verse 22?
Thank you. The Lord your God will dislodge those people before you little by little. You will not be able to put an end to them at once, else the wild beasts would multiply to your hurt. The Lord your God will deliver them up to you, throwing them into your utter panic until they are wiped out. He will deliver their kings into your hand, and you shall obliterate their name from under the heavens. No man shall stand up to you until you have wiped them out.
And Steve, would you like to read the next part there at verse 25?
Oh, thank you. You shall consign the image of their God to the fire. You shall not covet the silver and gold on them, and keep it for yourselves, lest you be ensnared thereby. For that is abhorrent to the Lord your God, as you must not bring an abhorrent thing into your house, or you will be proscribed like it. You must reject it as abominable and abhorrent, for it is proscribed.
Thank you. And Richard, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 8?
Chapter 8:1. You shall faithfully observe all the instructions that I enjoin upon you today, that you may thrive and increase and be able to occupy the land which the Lord promised on oath to your fathers. Remember the long way that the Lord your God has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years, that he might test you by hardships to learn what is in your hearts, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your fathers had ever known, in order to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but that man may live on anything that the Lord decrees. The clothes upon you did not wear out, nor did your feet swell these 40 years. Bear in mind that the Lord your God disciplines you just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore, keep the commandments of the Lord your God walk in his ways, and revere him.
Thank you. And June, would you like to read a little bit there, starting at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and springs and fountains, issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat and barley, of vines, figs, and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat food without stint, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron, and from whose hills you can mine copper. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God and fail to keep his commandments, his rules, and his laws, which I enjoin upon you today. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own has prospered, be aware, lest your heart grow haughty, and you forget the Lord your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its serpents and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, who brought forth water for you from the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers had never known, in order to test you by hardships only to benefit you in the end. And you say to yourself, my own power and the might of my own hand hath won this wealth for me. Remember that it is the Lord your God who gives you the power to get wealth in fulfillment of the covenant that he made on oath with your fathers, as is still the case. If you do not forget the Lord your God and follow other gods to serve them or bow down to them, I warn you this day that you shall certainly perish. Like the nations that the Lord will cause to perish before you, so shall you perish, because you did not heed the Lord your God.
Thank you. Jay Iser, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 9?
Thank you, Rabbi. Hear, O Israel, you are about to cross the Jordan, to go in and dispossess nations greater and more populous than you, great cities with walls sky high, a people great and tall, the Anakites, of whom you have knowledge, for you have heard it said, who can stand up to the children of Anak? Know then this day that none other than Adonai your God is crossing at your head, a devouring fire. It is he who will wipe them out. Adonai will subdue them before you, that you may quickly dispossess and destroy them, as Adonai has promised you. And when Adonai your God has thrust them from your path, say not to yourselves, the Lord has enabled us to possess this land because of our virtues. It is rather because of the wickedness of those nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. It is not because of your virtues and your rectitude that you will be able to possess their country, but it is because of their wickedness that Adonai is dispossessing those nations before you, and in order to fulfill the oath that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh made to your fathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov.
Thank you so much, Jay. And let me invite Mark Thompson, if you'd like to read there at verse 6.
Thank you, Rabbi. Know then that it is not for any virtue of yours that Adonai your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, never forget how you provoked Adonai your God to anger in the wilderness from the day that you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place. You have continued defiant toward Adonai. At Horeb, you so provoked Adonai that Adonai was angry enough with you to have destroyed you. I had ascended the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant that the Lord had made with you. And I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, eating no bread and drinking no water. And the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God, with the exact words that the Lord had addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. At the end of those 40 days and 40 nights, The Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. And the Lord said to me, hurry, go down from here at once. For the people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted wickedly. They have been quick to stray from the path that I enjoined upon them, and they have made themselves a molten image. The Lord further said to me, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, and I will destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make you a nation far more numerous than they.
Thank you. And Paul, would you like to read there at verse 15?
Thank you, Rabbi. So I turned and descended from the mountain as the mountain was burning in fire. And the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my 2 hands. Then I saw, and behold, you had sinned to Hashem your God. You made yourselves a molten calf. You strayed quickly from the way that Hashem commanded you. I grasped the 2 tablets and threw them from my 2 hands, and I smashed them before your eyes. Then I threw myself down before Hashem as the first time, 40 days and 40 nights. Bread I did not eat, water I did not drink, because of your entire sin that you committed to do that which is evil in the eyes of Hashem, to anger him. For I was terrified of the wrath and blazing anger with which Hashem had been provoked against you to destroy you. And Hashem hearkened to me that time as well. Hashem became very angry with Aaron to destroy him. So I prayed also for Aaron at that time. Your sin that you committed, the calf, I took and burned it in fire, and I pounded it, grinding it well until it was just as fine dust. And I threw the dust into the brook that descended from the mountain.
Thank you, Paul. Let me invite Robert to continue there at verse 22.
Thank you. It took me a minute to get my microphone squared away. And at Taberah and at Massah and at Kibroth, Katavah, you provoked the Lord to wrath. Likewise, when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land which I have given you, then you rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God, and ye believed him not, nor hearkened to his voice. Ye have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you. Thus I fell down before the Lord 40 days and 40 nights, as I fell down at the first, because the Lord had said he would destroy you. I prayed therefore unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, destroy not thy people and thine inheritance, which thou hast redeemed through thy greatness, which thou hast brought forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember thy servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Look not unto the stubbornness of this people, nor to their wickedness, nor to their sin, lest the land whence thou broughtest us out say, because the Lord was not able to bring them into the land which he promised them, and because he hated them, he hath brought them out to slay them in the wilderness. Yet they are thy people and thine inheritance, which thou broughtest out by thy mighty power and by thy stretched out arm.
Thank you, Robert. Dave Lev, would you like to read starting at the beginning of verse 1 of chapter 10?
Thereupon Adonai said to me, carve out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain and make an ark of wood. I will inscribe on the tablets the commandments that were on the first tablets that you smashed, and you shall deposit them in the ark. I made an ark of acacia wood and carved out 2 tablets of stone like the first. I took the 2 tablets with me and went up the mountain. After inscribing on the tablets the same text as on the first, the 10 commandments that Adonai addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire on that day of assembly, Adonai gave them to me. Then I left and went down the mountain, And I deposited the tablets in the ark that I had made, where they still are, as Adonai has commanded me. From Beeroth Bene Jaakan, the Israelites marched to Masreh. Aaron died there and was buried there, and his son Eleazar became priest in his stead. From there they marched to Gudgod, and from Gudgod to Jotbath, a region of running brooks.
Thank you so much, Dave. And Jim, would you like to read starting at verse 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. At the time Adonai set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, to stand in attendance upon Adonai and to bless in his name, as is still the case. That is why the Levites have received no hereditary portion along with their kinsmen. Adonai is their portion, as Adonai your God spoke concerning them. I had stayed on the mountain as I did the first time, 40 days and 40 nights, and Adonai heeded me once again. Adonai agreed not to destroy you. And Adonai said to me, up, resume the march at the head of the people, that they may go in and possess the land that I swore to their fathers to give them.
Thank you so much. Renee, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 12?
All right. And now, Israel, what doth the Lord my God, thy God, require of thee, but to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's thy God, the earth also with all that therein is. Only the Lord has a delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day. Circumcise therefore the foreskins of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, a great God, a mighty and a terrible, which regardeth not persons, not taketh reward. That should be enough, huh?
Thank you. And Marty, would you like to continue there at verse 18 and finish our chapter?
Thank you, Rabbi. But upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing him with food and clothing. You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You must revere the Lord your God. Only him shall you worship. To him shall you hold fast, and by his name shall you swear. He is your glory, and he is your God, who wrought all for you those marvelous, awesome deeds that you saw with your own eyes. Your ancestors went down to Egypt, 70 persons in all, and now the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars of heaven.
Thank you so much, Marty. Let me invite David and Susan if you'd like to continue with the start of chapter 11.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. And you shall love the Lord your God and keep his watch and his statutes and his laws and his commands for all time. And you shall know today that it was not with your sons who did not know and did not see the Lord your God's chastisement, his greatness, his strong hand and his outstretched arm, and his signs and his deeds that he did in the midst of Egypt to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to all his land, and that he did to Egypt's force, its horses and its chariots, when he made the waters of the Sea of Reeds flood over their faces, they pursued after them. And the Lord made them perish to this day, and that he did for you in the wilderness until you came to this place And that he did to Dathan and to Abiram, the sons of Eliab, son of Reuben, when the earth gaped open with its mouth and swallowed them, and their households and their tents and everything existing that was at their feet in the midst of all Israel. For your own eyes have seen the Lord's great deed that he has done. And you shall keep all the command which I charge you today, so that you may be strong and come and take hold of the land into which you are about to cross, to take hold of it, and so that you may long endure on the soil that your Lord your God swore to your fathers to give to them and to their seed, a land flowing with milk and honey.
For the land into which you are coming to take hold of it is not like the land of Egypt from which you went out, where you sow your seed and water it with your foot like a garden of greens. But the land into which you are crossing to take hold of it is a land of mountains and valleys. From the rain of heavens you will drink water, a land that the Lord your God seeks out perpetually. The eyes of the Lord your God are upon it from the year's beginning to the year's end. And it shall be, if you indeed heed my commands, with which I charge you today, to love the Lord your God and to worship him with all your heart and with all your being. I will give you the rain of your land in its season, early rains and late, and you shall gather in your grain and your wine and your oil. And I will give grass in your field for your beast, and you shall eat and be sated. Watch yourselves, lest your heart be seduced, and you swerve and worship other gods and bow to them. And the Lord's wrath flare against you, and he hold back the heavens, and there be no rain, and the soil give not its yield, and you perish swiftly from the goodly land that the Lord is about to give you.
Thank you so much, both of you. And Robin, would you like to read beginning at verse 18?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Therefore, impress these my words upon your very heart. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, and teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up, and inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that Adonai swore to your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is a heaven over the earth. If then you faithfully keep all this instruction that I command you, loving Adonai your God, walking in all God's ways, and holding fast to God, Adonai will dislodge before you all these nations. You will dispossess nations greater and more numerous than you. Every spot on which your foot treads shall be yours. Your territory shall extend from the wilderness to the Lebanon, and from the river, the Euphrates, to the western sea. No one shall stand up to you. Adonai your God will put the dread and the fear of you over the whole land in which you set foot, as promised.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. That entire Torah portion of the week, I'd like to share a little bit of a focus study with you, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation. So at the very top of the study sheet, there's a painting by Jasper Johns. It's actually in what's called an acoustic, which is a molten wax mixed with pigment that's overlaid on a canvas, and there's underneath it collage, and we can discuss that further. And we're going to get into the nature of Jasper Johns' work, and this work in particular a little bit later in the course of our study. And I've entitled this week's study session, Faithful Questions, and we're going to explore the nature of questions and what it means to have faithful questions, questions that are full of faith, in a sense. this Torah portion continues Moses's recitation to the Israelites of their own history, their own story, their origin, if you will, as a people, their origin story, which basically describes the movement from Egypt into the land of Canaan. In that sense, it's a movement from the chaos that slavery in Egypt represents to the hope and promise and fulfillment and maturation of freedom and responsibility that the land of promise represents. And in a sense, this whole journey replicates the creation story that we see in Genesis, where all begins with a sense of unformedness and chaos, and eventually becomes differentiation and distinction and purpose. Trees and rocks and birds and human beings are all endowed with both differentiation and purpose in existence. And that's what's happening here in this long story that we've been reading ever since the beginnings in slavery in Egypt, which is emerging out of the chaos into some new purpose and differentiation and distinction. And it's going to end at the border of the promised land, because the next story, if you will, is not a story about God as much as it's going to be a story about human initiative and responsibility. So in this particular portion, what struck me as I studied it this year was that Moses discusses a couple of different incidents in their history, and I found them to be two sets of experiences. One has to do with the molten calf and the incident at Kadesh Barnea, which are joined together as if they are a similar in kind and constitute a distinct set of incidents. And then the other reference has to do with what happened in the wilderness when the people said they were hungry and they got manna. So we're going to explore these two different sets of experiences that Moses is describing for them as part of their history. And we're going to see what they each represent. And in number 1 on the study sheet is the reference to the incident where the people were hungry after having just left Egypt, where he says, Moses says, well, God gave you manna to eat. And that's one kind of experience, this desire for and questioning about their own existence, and they received manna as a result. The other experience is referenced in chapter 9. You made yourselves a molten calf. And that turns out to be a very different kind of initiative by the Israelites, and it results in a very different category of response to God. So we're going to explore that a little bit. Number 2 are the verses from our Torah portion, in which it's very interesting. I found that the incident of the molten calf, the golden calf, is connected by proximity to the incident at Kadesh Barnea. Here in number 2, you made yourself a molten calf, and you had quickly departed from the way that God had instructed to you. And then a few verses later, and when Adonai sent you on from Kadesh Barnea, you rebelled. So here Moses is kind of drawing a connection between what happened with the building of the golden calf and what happened at Kadesh Barnea. If you remember what happened at Kadesh Barnea, that's when they had reached, by year 2, they had reached the border to the promised land, and the spies went in and they came back and they said, oh, it's beautiful, it's fertile, there's great fruit and that grows there, but we'll never be able to settle there. The people who live there are too great, and we must look like grasshoppers in their eyes. So there's a rejection of entering into the land. So it's interesting that the description that Moses has about making the golden calf, he says, when you did that, that represented a break from the way that God had laid out for you. It represented a rejection of God. It represented not only a rejection of God, but it represented a rejection of what you were being offered. What you were being offered was the understanding that life is, in fact, a journey. It's full of mystery, and it's full of evolution, and it's full of motion. It's full of movement. And instead, what you tried to do is you tried to solidify everything. You tried to make everything fixed, and you tried to make everything unmoving. And that's what the golden calf represented. And to do that represented a break from the way in which God had been trying to lead you and what it meant to be free. What it meant to be free is to assume initiative and responsibility and to take risks. And instead, you didn't want that. And the same thing happened at Kadesh Barnea. Literally, they refused to move. They refused to move over the border. They didn't want that. And they didn't want to take the risks and the responsibilities that were involved in crossing over. They wanted to stay in the embrace of God forever. They wanted to stay within the wilderness. They wanted to stay as people who were be continually taken care of by God. And that too constituted a break with what the pathway was all about from Egypt. The pathway was not to become another set of slaves. The pathway from Egypt was to become a free people, to become a responsible people, to become an accountable people. And so these two incidents represent a sharp fracture with their very mission and purpose, and consequently their relationship with God. In contrast to that, there were other episodes and incidents that Moses refers to that are quite different in their quality and nature. And those are referenced by when Moses talks about, remember when God gave you manna to eat. And so that reference takes us back to Exodus, and that's in number 3. I have heard the murmurings of the Israelites. In the morning you shall have your fill of bread. This notion of murmuring, which comes from the Hebrew verb nun, to murmur, it can be seen as kind of a challenge to God, a questioning of God, expressing a grievance. And somehow this does not represent the same degree of fracture and rejection and rebellion that the golden calf and the incident at Kadesh Barnea represents. This represents something that seems, well, natural and human, to wonder where we're going to get our food from, how we're going to survive. And the response is not a condemnation. The response is, you're going to have your fill of bread. Well, let's continue with the reference here from Exodus to see about what they got. When the fall of dew lifted, there, over the surface of the wilderness, lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw this, they said to one another, Manhu, what is that? For they did not know what it was, Mahu. The house of Israel named it manna, man. What we're going to see is that a lot of commentary and interpretation now connects this substance that they eat with what's being expressed in the Hebrew with these words, manhu or mahu, which is, what is it? In other words, as we'll see, as Aviva Zornberg is going to mention, what they're eating, what they're being sustained by, is this notion of questioning. number 4 is a quote from Aviva Zornberg's book, Bewilderments. Manna is both bread and not bread. The unknowable leads the traveler to an imaginative knowledge, which transfigures the world. So this notion about manna it's not just a physical bread. It is in essence both, as she says, bread and not bread. It is really what they saw was a question. That's what they feasted on. They feasted on a question. And what Aviva Zornberg is telling us is that when you're full, when you feast on a question, you continue a journey. You begin to, in a sense, as she says, you enter into the realm of imagination. You begin to enter into the world of creativity. You begin to enter into the world of refiguring things and thereby transfiguring both yourself and the world. To pursue this notion about the importance of questioning as being a form of sustenance for the Israelites, if you turn over the study sheet on number 5, I have an excerpt from Elie Wiesel's book, Night, about his encounter with the Shoah. And if those of you read that book, you'll note that the character Moshe is the person who takes care of the synagogue in the village where Elie Wiesel is living, and Moshe has to leave, and then because he leaves the village, he sees what the Nazis are doing. He comes back and he tries to tell everyone what's happening. And here is this little excerpt with Elie Wiesel asking this character Moshe, "And why do you pray, Moshe?" I asked him. "I pray to the God within me that he will give me the strength to ask the right questions." And Elie Wiesel becomes quite fascinated with this notion about the power of questions and the way questioning helps connect us to God. And he says this very simple thing, Elie Wiesel, he says, God is in the question. And Hebrew, quite beautifully and poetically, displays that. For here is the word question in Hebrew, she'elah. And if you look at that 4-letter word, in the 2 middle letters, El is a name for God. And so just as a work of art there, Elie Wiesel is right. God is in the question, literally. And so now to pursue this a little bit more, in my study for this week, I stumbled across this book called Art and Physics, Parallel Visions in Space, Time, and Light by Leonard Schlein. And Leonard Schlein is a doctor in California. And he wrote this book, which after I came across it, I bought it. I got it the other day. And his basic theme is that artists prefigure realities that physicists then later come to discover as a matter of science. And it's quite fascinating. So in his book, though, he has this quote from the great African-American author, James Baldwin. "The purpose of art is to lay bare the questions which have been hidden by the answers." In a sense, that's what the Golden Calf was about. It was an attempt to come up with an answer because the people were worried. They said, "Where is Moses?" They became anxious. And so what they did was, instead of going deeper into the mystery, which is what Moses was doing at the time, they tried to solidify things. They tried to fix things. They tried to reify, to solidify things. And as James Baldwin was saying, well, when you have answers, then in effect, what you're doing is you are forestalling future growth and life, because life is found within the questions. And that's what the role of art is to undo people's assuming that they know what things are, that things are fixed. And the role of art is to disturb people, to kind of crush, as Moses does, to crush that bit of solidity, so that people have to return to the notion of mystery and recreation. And let me conclude, and then we'll share a little bit about Jasper Johns and his painting. And this is from Dr. Abdul Sattar Awad Ibrahim, who is a professor of English at a university in Iraq. And he wrote in a piece called Ambiguity in Poetry. Ambiguity in a poem makes the reader try to search for or unfold what possibilities he can think of in relation to the thing described or referred to. As the reader is not satisfied with what he reads, trying to find relationships and associations among things. The role of ambiguity is to provoke, it's to help us cause us to be dissatisfied with the certainty that we see before us, to dig deeper. And when we do that, we start activating our own capacities to imagine and interpret. We become alive. Ambiguity causes us to become alive. And I want to suggest that's what all of Torah is really about. It is full of ambiguities designed to cause us to become participants in the creation of meaning. And that's why it's very difficult for people in other faith traditions who have a very different approach, which is to rely on doctrine to guide them along the way. And Judaism is not a doctrine-oriented religion. It's an interpretive religion. So let me turn back to the painting of Jasper Johns. If you read the email this week, you saw a little bit about the life of Jasper Johns growing up in Georgia, and then being raised in South Carolina in a very, I would call it a provincial setting. For a while, he was just in a single room schoolhouse with, I think, 2 other students. And he was named after this figure from the American Revolutionary War who went out and rescued a flag that had been shot down by the British. And somehow, both that, having been named after someone who rescued a flag that had been shot down, and his aunt, who always impressed upon him the importance of the flag, Jasper Johns became, one of his iconic themes was to paint the American flag. And he painted it in many different formats and colors and with different accentuations and so forth. And this flag that's on the study sheet is from 1967. And there are, underneath it, there are cut up sections from the front page of the New York Times. And what Jasper Johns is trying to get us to do, in a sense, is to look at something that we think we know, and to look at it closely and deeply and discover there's more to it than we thought. And that was, I would suggest, an ongoing theme of all of his work, to have us look at things the mind thinks it already knows, only to discover that there's a depth and a richness to it that we hadn't discovered. And that's what he's doing here with the flag. It's a familiar object to us, but he presents it to us in both a medium and a format and a context that causes us to think about it more, and to ask questions about, well, what is the flag really about? What does it really represent? Maybe it represents something unfixed. Maybe it represents something that requires some provocation, that requires some questioning, that requires some thought and interpretation on our part. So here, this is where I get this week's title of Faithful Questions. Moses seems to be telling us in his recitation of the history of Israel that there are certain positions that one can take that cause such a break and such a fracture with what our mission is, that it causes us to become lost to ourselves and to history and to the future. And then there are some questions which are asked not out of a desire to break and fracture the relationship with God, which is the source of our purpose and our mission. But they are questions designed, if you will, to tease out what exactly is our mission and how are we to go about it. And those are what I call faithful questions. So with that, I would love to hear what else you saw, what you were provoked by, and what comments you'd like to share about this week's Torah portion. If you like, go ahead, Sherry.
Well, at the beginning, when it talks about going into the land, this has always bothered me. It sounds an awful lot like genocide, going in and, killing all the cattle and killing the people and taking their land. And it's justified because God wants to give this land to us. And it's deeply troubling to me, always has been.
Of course. So here's a couple of things. One that I noticed as we studied this week, which is God reminds us, look, it's not because you're virtuous that you're going to get this. It's because they're worse than you are. So that's a reminder, if you will, that, oh, we're getting this land not because we're virtuous. We're getting because the other people that were living here were so unvirtuous. That means the only way we will hold on to us is if we don't become unvirtuous, right? And then the other is, look, you can either read this as a matter of history that is happening on this temporal historical level, or you can read this as this is a work of art, and it's trying to say, how can I paint a picture, write a poem, compose a piece of music that will cause people to think about what does it mean to be here in this world. And the other is, you can either read this as being a story that's describing something that's going to happen, or it's being written retrospectively after something has happened, when people are trying to understand, here we are in this land, how did we get here? And what does it mean to be here? And so you can read it as a prescription of what it means to conquer a land, or it can be an after the fact description of, well, how did you get here? Well, you got here because the other people didn't take care of things. You got here because the other people were so violent and unvirtuous that they lost the opportunity to hold on to it. Okay. Go ahead, Robert.
Once again, I always love the evening. Thank you so much. It's interesting about art and poetry. I was thinking this week about trees. And, everything in nature has a story about truth and reality. And I was thinking how, the trunk of the tree is like religion, the morality, the principles, the goodness, the charity, that essence, whether it be Judaism, Baha'i, Christianity, etc., that essence, that's the same in religion. And then I was thinking, the branches, these big branches are like science. We need science, we need technology. We needed the wheel in the days of Moses, to move and so forth. But then I thought, art is like the rustling of the leaves. And the rustling of the leaves is that mystic part of the tree when the winds of thought and reflection, breezes of pondering flow through, and you get the rustling, the beauty, and the sound, and makes one think deeply about life. So it was interesting that I was thinking about that this week.
Well, that's lovely. It made me think about the description of the prophet Elijah and experiencing the thunder and experiencing the earthquake. And if you will, those are the eruptions of history. And that's not where God is found. God is found in the small, still voice, which is kind of like the whispering in the leaves. That's lovely. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you.
And others, thoughts, questions, provocations? Anna?
Well, we know that leaves can communicate, that one tree can communicate to another tree. So while you have the still small voice, the rustling leaf, it is also an entwining and an intimacy with that which surrounds it.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. The way, yes, the trees talk to one another, and the roots in the ground.
They communicate, they warn,
Yeah,
they nurture.
lovely. Thank you. And Susan.
So, and you just mentioned Elijah, and I know that there's parts of Deuteronomy where Moses says, here he's warning, do not stray from Adonai, but in other places he says, we know, God knows you're going to. But we just did a study with Daniel Matt on Elijah. And one of the things he said today was that at first Elijah was kind of into doom and gloom, and then he had this kind of rejuvenation, and God told him that he had to go to all the brisses to see how his people stayed with him. So it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, in fact, I think we talked about that a few sessions ago, about how Elijah going to all the brisses was like for Pinchas. We talked about how Pinchas and Elijah were in commentary are associated, that they're both these self-righteous and towards violent people, and that for Pinchas and for Elijah, for Pinchas, the Brit Shalom is not a reward, it's sending someone to therapy, right? Sending someone to rehab. And that's what Elijah going before all the brisses is not a reward, it's a form of therapy and rehab for him to be able to emerge out of his self-righteousness and his violence. Yeah. Thank you for lovely that you studied with Danny Matt. Lovely. Okay. Other thoughts and reactions to Mark Thompson? I'll mark you now. You're on mute. If you could unmute. Yeah.
Okay. I'm really fascinated with the difference or the characterization of a faithful question. So comes to me, I wonder how one might characterize an unfaithful question from a faithful one. I may sound a little bit like Yoda, but is there a question in which God is not? I'm just wondering if on a practical level, when we question, is it a matter of speaking or a style of speaking, or is it the intent behind the question? I just wonder how we can be more mindful of the questions that we ask and whether they are faithful or not faithful questions.
So in the rabbis of the Talmud, they take up that question and they say, in a sense, they say, what is a question that's, because the Talmud is based upon questions, right?
Right.
And they say, well, what would be considered, if you will, an unfaithful question? And the example they give is Korach. They say that wasn't for the sake of trying to explore a deeper truth. It wasn't for the sake of trying to establish a greater connection. It wasn't the desire to bring about greater peace. It was a desire for power. And a desire for power ultimately is what's being characterized here as that kind of a break, either a resignation of one's responsibility or some kind of act of seeking to acquire power. These are the kinds of questions that sound sincere. That's when Korach asks his questions. Well, they sound reasonable. Who made you? Well, aren't we all priests in this nation? They sound reasonable, but it's that demagogic approach which is really hiding a cynicism and insincerity and a concern merely for oneself and one's acquisition of greater power over others. That's what.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me call upon Richard and then Paul.
I'll try to make this understandable, but your statement or the statements about what was going on at the river there and crossing over and why they didn't want to go over and take up the land and this manna, which wasn't food, it was non-food and something else, and it made one refigure the world. And I had the idea that one way of looking at the crossing over this is about life and death. We're learning as we go through life about stuff. God is out here in front of us if we figure it this way. And it's always there, and we try to find out best how to create love in our relationships and so forth in our state. But here it's about crossing over to the other side and refiguring what food is and what the world is. And we have a chance to get over the power urge, either out of fear that gets us for power or avarice. And we don't want to die with avarice on our faces. And so this is about what do you have to do with the comportment of your feelings and your thinking and your questions that you can get the most out of being alive so you're ready to cross over. That's what I got.
Let me just, so very beautiful. Let me just, so what you got me thinking about was the notion about at the manna, the moment of manna, what the message there is, what will sustain you are questions. And of course, questions, normally we think of questions coming from a place of lack. No, I ask a question because I don't have something. I don't have knowledge, or I don't have a thing. So I ask for it. I ask for questions. And what that message is trying to say is it's the opposite.
Yes.
Questions are what are fulfilling. Questions are what sustain you. And that's why Shabbat, we've talked about this before, about how Shabbat is this moment, this practice that we have every week, this opportunity to experience that it is, if you stop striving for everything, you'll have everything. And so it is that notion about, it's not, you can overcome, we are all filled with a sense of anxieties and lack and worry. And what this spiritual practice is trying to teach us is the capacity that we can get beyond the anxiety of lack if we, in a sense, immerse ourselves regularly in a sense of, I don't have to strive for anything in order to have everything. And then the purpose of coming out of Shabbat then is not to be meek. We're not encouraged to be meek. Our tradition is to encourage us to be ambitious. But the ambition comes not from an awareness of that we lack things, the ambition comes from our lesson from Shabbat, which is you've got everything. And so once you have that sense of fulfillment, then you can be ambitious, not out of a sense of out of avariceness, out of a desire to take away from other people, but the ambition is to express one's self, to express one's creativity, to express one's initiative, to express one's entrepreneurship, to express one's sense of fulfillment. That's what the ambition in our tradition is about, not to take away because we don't have things, so from others, because we don't have things. So thank you for that. Let me call Paul and then Catherine.
Okay, I want to say that Robert actually made me think a little bit, because he mentioned about the tree, and that he assumed the tree was, there was an assumption, which is opposite of a question in my mind, because he couldn't see that there was something spiritual about the tree, so he had to reach out for the leaves, that the rustle of the leaves was where it was at, and he just bypassed the tree. And when I put that together with the 5 o'clock news I had today, where this Frenchman who was an environmentalist was looking at the river, and somebody in his organization a couple of 10 years back threw a catfish in the river, and the river had nothing for the catfish to eat. Yet, so many years later, he looks at the catfish, and the catfish, they're thriving, but there's nothing in the river for that catfish to eat. And he watched and watched, and his assumption was wrong, because then he watched the catfish, in order to survive, realized there's nothing in the water. He had to look on land. And what do they have around Paris? Pigeons. Not all our statues. Some are on the edge of the water. And they devised a method of when the pigeon gets a little too close, the catfish does something to attract it, just to get the pigeon into the water. But if you assume that just like the tree, maybe the fish doesn't know too much, but maybe, you know, the idea of the assumption, maybe we should go to the questions, maybe.
There's a song, catfish got whiskers and a cute little grin, but you never know where that catfish has been.
Thank you. Let me invite Catherine, if you'll unmute and share with us. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the rustling of the leaves led me to think about the rustling of the flag. There's a kind of rustling within the flag. The flag is not something that we just take for granted. It's something that we need to.
Thank you, Catherine. So we're having a little. Thank you. We had a little bit of missed part of what you said, but I love the image that you shared with us about the wind, which is keeping things moving, which is rustling things, which is disturbing the stillness, if you will. And I think that's part of the message here too. And that is, I think, the message that Jasper Johns in his artwork is conveying. I think one of the primary influences in Jasper Johns' work were the Dadaists who preceded him. And the Dadaists, what they tried to do is they took everyday objects and they placed them in such unusual context that they caused people to think about what they had always accepted as the nature of that object. Okay? And that's what, and they were provocative. And what Jasper John is doing, I think, in a very gentle way, is taking objects that are very familiar to us, especially something like the American flag, and he tweaks it a little bit, he adds something to it a little bit, he puts it in a context a little bit, in order to cause some wind to rustle over it, just like you're describing, Kevin, to cause some disturbance in the fixed nature that we have imbued that flag with, to cause us to see something in the rustling of it that we might not have seen before, and to consider the complexity and depth of what that represents. It is not easy to ask questions. It's not easy to ask difficult questions. And it certainly helps to have a community of questioners who are willing to hear what the other person has to ask as a way of exploring with that person the depth of what is being looked at, and to endure with the other person the rustling that is occurring, the disturbance that is occurring, and to allow the questioner to feel comfortable in the questions, and to reach some deeper level of understanding, not only for him or herself, but for all those who are part of the community. And I want to say that's what it is like for me to be a part of this community. I feel comfortable to be asking these questions and exploring things, knowing that the rustling that we're doing, the disturbance that we're doing, is designed out of a sense of faithfulness rather than rebellion. And with that, I'm so grateful to each and every one of you. May God bless you, and may you be healthy and well, and look forward to our regathering. Thank you all very much. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the group.